Biכורים, Perek Beis, Mishnah Vav. Our Mishnah continues with a theme that we've had in our Perek till now of contrasting various things. But instead of contrasting Biכורים and Trumas and Maisvus, we're now going to be discussing an esrog and contrasting various halachas within an esrog. The Mishnah starts off by telling us esrog shaveh lo ilon b'shloisha devachim. An esrog is compared to a tree in three specific aspects. V'layorok b'derech echad, and it's compared to a vegetable in one aspect in relation to one halacha. There are in fact other differences besides these four to do with what bracha you make on an esrog, whether hilchas kelayim, but the Mishnah is not going into that. The Mishnah is talking about one specific aspect, and that is, we need to know in which year of the 7-year Shemitah cycle does the esrog fall. If something is compared to a tree, generally speaking, fruits of a tree fall into the year in which the chanotah takes place. Chanotah is the point at which the blossoming of the fruit begins to emerge. When the flower falls off and the fruit itself starts to emerge. That's called a chanotah. Whichever year of the 7-year Shemitah cycle that falls, that's the year designated to this fruit. A vegetable, however, is looked at differently. A vegetable is looked at b'shas l'kitosai, at the time when it's picked, or when it's ready to be picked. And whenever that vegetable is ready to be picked, that's the year in which it falls. What difference does it make in which year it falls? Well, the halachas are different for different years. Generally speaking, a farmer always has to first take truma. He gives that to the kohen. He then takes 10% of what's left as Maaseh Rishon and gives it to the Levi. And he then takes 10% of what's left as Maaseh Sheni, which he takes to Yerushalayim and he eats it there. However, in the 3rd year and the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle, there is no Maaseh Sheni. Instead of Maaseh Sheni, he takes that 10% and it's Maaseh Oni, and it's given to the Oni. So we need to know in which year it falls to know what we're supposed to do with that fruit. The Mishnah starts off by telling us the first halacha is shaveh lo ilon ba'olah. One of the 3 halachas in which it's compared to an ilon is for the halacha of olah. And we know, we've mentioned previously, the halacha of olah is that any fruit which grows within the first 3 years of the tree's life is considered to be olah. It's also ba'achila and it's also ba'hano. How do we know whether this fruit has emerged in the first 3 years? It's toila on the chanotah. An esrog is compared to a tree in this respect, and if it began to emerge, if the blossoming took place within the first 3 years, then it's considered to be olah fruit, and it cannot be eaten, and it cannot be given any hana. The second halacha is over avoy. Neta avoy is fruit from the 4th year. Again, it's compared to a tree, which means we go bosa chanotah. At what point did the chanotah take place? If the chanotah took place in the 4th year, then this fruit is neta avoy, and it's taken by the owners to Yerushalayim and eaten there. The third halacha is ova shvius. It's compared to a tree with regard to Shemitah. 7th year produce, which means if the chanotah took place in the 7th year, then this esrog will have kedushas shvius. If it took place in the 6th year, it will have 6th year designation, which means it doesn't have kedushas shvius, even if it was only picked during shvius. So it wasn't picked until the next year. We don't go boss of the picking, we go boss of the chanotah. And Bartanora tells us, if you have an esrog which had its chanotah in the 6th year, it will not have kedushas shvius. But if you pick it during Shemitah year, it is not subject to Trumas and Maisvus. Even though it doesn't have kedushas shvius, nevertheless, just like all other Shemitah produce is not subject to Trumas and Maisvus, so too, when you pick this fruit in Shemitah, I will explain more of this later, it is potter from Trumas and Maisvus. So the Mishnah continues, V'layorok b'derech echad. And this esrog is compared to a yorok, compared to a vegetable, in relation to one specific aspect. What is that? Sheb'shas l'kitosai isuroi. At the time of its l'kita, at the time of its picking, that is the year into which the maisa will be designated. Divrei Rabbi Gamliel, this is the shitta of Rabbi Gamliel. This means that if the esrog is picked, for instance, in the 3rd year, even though the chanotah, the blossoming of the esrog, took place in the 2nd year, it will be subject to Maaseh Oni like 3rd year produce. Tosfos Yontav brings down a case where if you have an esrog which the chanotah took place during Shemitah, and we said that as far as Shemitah is concerned, we go Bosach HaNotot compared to a tree, that means that this Esrog has Kedush HaShviyis. If it's later on picked in the 8th year, the first year of the new cycle, it will be potter from Trumas and Maisus. Even though we've said that as far as Maisa is concerned, we go Bosach the picking, but since we're talking about Shemitah produce here, we're talking about something which is that the Chanot took place during Shviyis, during Shemitah year, therefore it's potter from Trumas and Maisus, like all produce, which is Shemitah produce. This is unlike the Bartanur we mentioned earlier. Bartanur earlier mentioned, you'll recall, we said that if you have an esrog where the Chanot takes place in the 6th year, and therefore doesn't have Kiddush HaShviyis, and the picking, the Lakita, takes place during Shemitah, it's also potter from Trumas and Maisus. Even though this is 6th year produce, and 6th year produce should be subject to Trumas and Maisus, nevertheless, since the Lakita took place during Shemitah, and during Shemitah there's no Trumas and Maisus, we go Basa Lakita for that, and it's potter. The Mishnah carries on by telling us, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, the shit of Rabbi Eliezer is, Shove lo ilon b'chol dover. He says it's like a tree for everything. It's never like a vegetable. He argues with Rabbi Gamliel. And he tells us that even as far as Trumas and Maisus are concerned, it's considered like any other tree, and we go Bosa Chanota, not Bosa Lakita. What is the basis of the whole machloikus between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer? The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Yodalet, which brings down this mission, explains that there's a fundamental difference between the nature of a tree and the nature of a vegetable. As far as a tree is concerned, when a fruit grows from a tree, it gets its nourishment from the sap. The sap gets its koyach from the water which fell around the tree prior to chanota. So it soaks up all that water, then turns it into sap, and therefore the ikka primary growth of this fruit is until shas chanota. That's the important part, where all the water that came from the beginning till shas chanota, that's what makes this fruit grow. The opposite is the case with a vegetable. With a vegetable, it doesn't have a specific time in its growth period where you can say that all the water that came until this point, that's what makes it grow. A vegetable is growing from the water that it gets constantly till the very moment it's picked. The primary growth of a vegetable is throughout its life until it's picked. And that's the fundamental difference in the nature of a tree and a vegetable. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah actually brings down another shit as well, and he says that the difference is that a tree grows with rainwater, and a vegetable needs constant irrigation, and that would be the basic fundamental difference between the two. V'ad kan, Mishnah Vav.